The time is now for episode 1 of the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. That is Grant. A little bit later on, we will have the legend himself, Bob Stoll, on to talk about college football. But first, let's introduce ourselves.
What's up, everybody? My name's Grant. I just started working here at Dr. Bob Sports. I'm doing some digital media. You're going to see me here on the pod and also on Twitter, where I'm going to be posting podcast clips and then also some of the free analysis breakdown that they do for NFL and college football. So if you haven't seen those, definitely check them out. I've personally been using them on my own for 4 to 5 years. They're really informational. But yeah, I'm super excited to be here, and hopefully we can get off that 6-month Twitter hiatus soon.
Yeah, Grant, we're pumped to have you on board. We definitely could use some help on the digital media side, and we're excited to start this podcast. So, I started with Bob in 2017 when I took over our NFL product. And for those of you that have been in the space long enough, you'll remember that was right when football analytics were starting to get talked about a lot more publicly. And this was even 3 years before NFL Fast Star was released. So you could win back then with early down success rates, non-turnover EPA, and just adjusting for third down or red zone variance. But as the market evolves, Bob and I evolve with it, and the model has taken on a number of different complexities since then. And as shown by our record, which we are 57% over 472 best bets since I took over. And for those of you that care about closing line value, which you should, I'd be pretty skeptical of purchasing picks from anyone that isn't consistently getting CLV. We beat the closer on 80% of our best bets for an average of 3% captured in win probability since we started tracking every bet 5 years ago. And we're also 55% on strong opinions in my time originating NFL with Bob. So clients listening will know we've done particularly well with those postseason props, which we only release as strong opinions since it's difficult to get more than $1,000 down on props. If you've read any NFL analysis that Grant talked about earlier on drbobsports.com since 2017, that was me as well. I write about 4,000 words a week, previewing every game throughout the season. And we're going to be bringing some of that analysis into podcast form for those of you that have given up on reading. So,
Are you going to do anything with the basketball?
yeah. So, first of all, Carl, our NBA guru, has been on our site for the last 10 years, heading up our NBA product. And I think he started out anonymous, but now he's doing public appearances, kind of like what I'm doing here. You might have seen Carl on VSiN on Gil Alexander's show, and he's going to continue doing the NBA for us. I created our college basketball model that we launched in 2020 and also do the originating there. So clients will know that's quite the undertaking. We release bets 7 days a week at 9:30 a.m. Eastern from November through March. And it takes a full team of us. Bob, Jay, and myself are each responsible for certain aspects of the handicapping process. We're 55% on over 1,500 best bets during the last 3 seasons, and opinions are 54%. We get closing line value in college basketball on pretty much every bet, but that's less impressive than the NFL because it's just a much less liquid market. But I think our record and the sample size at this point speaks for itself. So we might talk college hoops at some point on this podcast, but for now, it's full steam ahead on the NFL.
All right. So we're going to be breaking down all 32 NFL teams. We're going to go division by division. We're going to start dropping episodes on Wednesdays and Fridays leading up to the season. So let's dive into the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs.
Let's do it.
So the Chiefs win total is set at 11.5 after coming off an impressive 14-3 season where they placed third in weighted DVOA. The Chiefs have now hosted the Arrowhead Invitational 5 years in a row. They've won the division 7 years in a row. And Patrick Mahomes now led them to 2 Super Bowls in the last 4 years. But there's been some offseason changes that we need to look into. Tan, we saw some immediate change with the loss of Tyreek Hill over the offseason. But the team was still first in explosive passing plays, first in short yardage success, and first in expected points per play. Last year, we didn't really miss a beat, but there's a couple new wideouts on town. What are you thinking about them?
Well, first of all, I like that you snuck in calling it the Arrowhead Invitational there. Grant is a Chiefs fan, and he's not gonna keep that secret all year long. So
No,
if
I
he
will
starts
not.
using we or us when he's talking about the Chiefs, don't be surprised. But to your question about the wideouts, like you said, they're making a couple of changes there. So on the way out, they did not re-sign Juju Smith-Schuster or Mecole Hardman, and they drafted Rashid Rice in the second round. I don't know I don't have too many high expectations. You don't expect a lot from a second round rookie, but the addition that I think Chiefs fans should be excited about, and that it looks like the analytics team in their front office had their fingerprints all over, was bringing in Richie James from the Giants, who I think is one of the more underrated receivers in the NFL. He had the fourth highest success rate when targeted last year, and that was between T. Higgins and Tyler Lockett. And CROE, which is an NFL Next Gen stat that they use the tracking data to create, which measures the difficulty of completion using a number of factors like separation from the nearest defender, depth of target, speed of pass, etc. James was number one in the NFL, and that number over George Pickens, Mike Williams, Dallas Goedert, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Boyd. I mean, some big names on the top 10 list, and Richie James headed that group. 538 receiver rankings, which factor in the difficulty completion like we talked about, but they also factor in the ability to get open and yards after catch, had James as the 26th best receiver in the NFL. And for reference, Juju ranked 46th in that same stat. So losing Juju and Mecole Hardman and bringing in James and Rashee Rice, I think is not going to be a downgrade for the Chiefs receiving core as a whole. And I think Richie James might surprise some people this year.
I think he will too. I'm pretty excited when you start saying stuff like that. But what are your thoughts on the Chiefs adding 2 new tackles this year?
Yeah, so, I mean, the Chiefs certainly have no problems on the interior offensive line. They only allowed 30% of their pressures up the interior last year, which was third in the NFL. But they did have poor tackle play on both sides, and they're actually replacing both tackles this year. So left tackle Orlando Brown signed a 4-year, $64 million contract with Cincinnati, which I think was lower than a lot of people projected going into the offseason. I think the NFL is basically telling you that they don't value an unathletic left tackle who may have bigger name value than his actual production. And I think Chiefs fans should be happy that they didn't re-sign him. So who they did sign was Juwan Taylor, the right tackle from Jacksonville, who ranks 7th in pass blocking efficiency on true pass blocking sets. And for those who don't know, PFF has what's called a true pass blocking set, which factors out screens, play actions, quick passes under 2 seconds, and when the defense only sends 3 pass rushers. And the reason that that's more relevant is it basically gives you a better look at the quality of what a tackle is, how he's blocking in sets that he's actually asked to go, one-on-one with a edge rusher, and it's not some sort of scheme that's just making his life easier. So, like I said, Taylor ranked 7th in that stat among tackles in the NFL. Orlando Brown ranked 31st, and Andrew Wiley, who started at the right tackle for the Chiefs last year, ranked 41st. So Taylor's a big upgrade on Brown and Wiley. And the Chiefs gave themselves an opportunity to draft a tackle in the first round, but when they didn't do that, after the draft, they signed Donovan Smith to play left tackle, and he ranked 25th in pass blocking efficiency on true pass blocking sets last year, and 16th in 2021. So I think Chiefs fans were skeptical in Smith when the signing was announced because he led the league in holding on that disaster of a Buccaneers offensive line last year. But I think we can mostly throw out what happened last year. I mean, it was a mess after they lost their starting center in training camp. All-pro right tackle Tristan Wirfs went down. Luke Hideki was probably the worst guard in the NFL last year. And Smith has a great track record. He's been a great track record of being durable. He started 8 seasons and he's only missed 6 games during that time. Now, I don't think that Smith is even an average tackle in the NFL, but even if he's slightly below average and you bring in Juwan Taylor, I think that the Chiefs did upgrade on the production that they got last year from Orlando Brown and Andrew Wiley.
That's great to hear. So we saw a little bit of change in the defensive line here. We lost Frank Clark, but we replaced him with Omenahu. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so, I mean, Chiefs fans were definitely not happy with Frank Clark's production based off of the trade capital and contract they gave him. And they finally get off of that contract, and they signed Charles Omenahu, who had 10 more pressures than Frank Clark last year on 47 fewer pass rushing snaps. So I think that this is at least a wash. I don't think that they upgrade or downgrade in the pass rush. If anything, George Karlaftis is a year older, and he will be likely to improve off of his rookie season. And they also used their first round pick on an edge rusher as well. So I think the edge rush or the pass rush as a whole is a slight improvement this year.
Well, that's good to hear. We made a kind of interesting move. We brought in Tranquil. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Drew Tranquil, off-ball linebacker coming over from the Chargers. It was interesting that he decided to sign with the Chiefs. They already have Willie Gay and Nick Bolton for their nickel packages, and they drafted Leo Chenal last year to bring in when they need an extra run defender. But in a vacuum, I like Drew Tranquil as a player. He was effective as a blitzer under Brandon Staley with a 24% pressure rate on blitzes, and during the last couple of seasons. And he also ranked 11th in coverage grade by PFF last year. So I think he's a decent linebacker. I don't know that he's going to be getting more than 300 snaps this year, but as insurance in case Gay or Bolton goes down, I think Tranquil was a solid signing by Brett Veach.
Yeah, I'd be a little surprised if he signed with us not to play too much, but you never know. Maybe insurance is always great for us. But we also lost Juan Thornhill and replaced him with Mike Edwards from Tampa Bay. What do you think about Mr. Mike Edwards?
Yeah, so Thornhill was one of the more athletic safeties in the league, and it might bringing in Edwards is certainly a downgrade from Thornhill, and it might Steve Spagnuolo might be able to not call as many disguise coverages because Edwards won't be able to cover as much ground. There's also a chance, and you can see on the RLADS page, that the Chiefs start Brian Cook, who they drafted last year in the second round at safety. But I think they brought in Edwards as insurance because he's proven himself as at least a solid, slightly below average starting NFL safety. He's earned over 2,000 snaps in Tampa Bay during his first 4 seasons. So he's not going to knock your socks off. He'll be a downgrade from Thornhill. And it'll be a training camp competition between him and Brian Cook at safety.
Yeah, that'd be exciting to watch. So when you look at the keys to keeping this success going, what do you think? Is it just all on Kelsey right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where Kelsey's kind of defying all tight end aging curves. He had the best age 31 season for tight end in NFL history, the best age 32 season, and the best age 33 season. And to put it in perspective, last year his 2.23 yards per route run was actually above his career average, which is crazy that he was better than his overall career as a 33-year-old tight end. But Antonio Gates and Tony Gonzalez are basically the only 2 tight ends to ever be effective in the NFL into their mid-30s. And we saw Rob Gronkowski did not last that long. So there's a cliff for Kelsey to fall off. I don't know if it's going to be this year. If it is, the Chiefs, are not going to be the number 1 offense in the NFL anymore. But that's really the thing to monitor for the Chiefs this year. And basically, their title defense rests on Kelsey being, one of the most effective receivers again.
So let's move on to the Chargers. So the Chargers win total is set at 9.5, and they're coming off a season where they finished 10-7 and were 16th in weighted DVOA. The Chargers have been riddled with injuries, and that continued last season as they were missing many of their star players for large portions of the season.
Yeah.
The Chargers did get Justin Herbert into his first career playoff game, and they would do what the Chargers are known to do, and that was blow a massive 27-point lead in the wild card round. So looking back on last season, they had Herbert had a chest fracture in week 2. Keenan missed time. Mike Williams was out for a lot. Rashawn Slater missed games. Bosa was hurt. J.C. Jackson was out, and Derwin James was banged up late. What can we really take away from the Chargers last season?
Yeah, I mean, you just listed a lot of Pro Bowl caliber players that were all missing time. And so, I mean, when you look at where the Chargers finished, just slightly above 500 in that blown game in the playoffs, when most of the guys were back, but had not had a ton of games under their belt all season together. I don't know that we can take a whole lot from what they did last year. So maybe let's reset to what we thought about the Chargers going into last season. So they finished the 2021 season 3 points better than an average team in our metrics. And the market had the Chargers as a +3.5 coming into last season in the summer around this time.
What do you really mean when you say the power ratings?
Oh, yeah. So those who basically the market is telling us what it thinks of team X versus team Y every week in terms of what the point spread is between those games. But to handicap games on our own, we have to see all the teams stacked up against each other. So what we do is we put them in power ratings where we play them against a hypothetical average team. And so when I say that the Chargers were 3 points better than an average team, you think of a team with an average quarterback, average offensive line, average secondary, the whole thing. And we'd say, what would the point spread be in that game? And even furthermore, we actually have to do we have to convert that points into win probability, because if you just use points, then you don't take into account the key numbers in the NFL, and you would not be ever betting, minus 2.5 point favorites or plus 3.5 point dogs. So, but it's easier to talk about in terms of points for right now. So let's say, like I said, 3.5 points better than average at the end of 2021. The market says 3.5 points better than average going in to last season. And then all the injuries that Grant laid out, and the up and down nature of last season, plus the blown lead in the playoffs to the Jaguars last year. And now, based off of all the 2023 point spreads, the market is saying that the Chargers are only about 3 points better than average, which I would say is a touch low, considering that they're basically bringing the exact same roster, and if not an improved coaching staff back from last year.
Yeah, when you look at the coaching staff, it looks like it might have got a little bit better. What are your thoughts on moving from Joe Lombardi to Kellen Moore?
Yeah, so Joe Lombardi was a Sean Payton disciple, and he's trying to run that quick pass, short passing offense without a lot of play action. And pretty much no one in the modern NFL has been successful running that offense except Sean Payton. We see Pete Carmichael tried to run that in New Orleans last year, and even Matt Canada with the Steelers has been trying to run kind of that short pass, no play action offense, and no one's really had a whole ton of success. And I think Joe Lombardi was even worse at it than most. So he was, one of the worst play callers in the NFL last year, and they changed to Kellen Moore, who I would say is definitively a top 10 play caller. He's been with the Cowboys, and Dak Prescott was 0.8 yards per pass play better with Kellen Moore calling the plays than he was in the 3 years of his career without Kellen Moore. So I think that we could see Herbert make a similar jump, and the Chargers offense should be better this year.
How do you see that offense looking different?
Yeah, so I mean, I think they're going to throw deeper more often with Kellen Moore. They're probably going to throw between the numbers more as well. They brought in, they drafted Quentin Johnston, the rookie wide receiver, to play alongside Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. And I think that it's going to be a more downfield offense, and they'll probably use passes between the numbers more often.
So when we look at their defense, Staley's defense when he was with the Rams was always really good, and they've pretty much been average to below average since he's been with the Chargers. What are you thinking about their offseason changes and people coming back healthy next year? What can we expect from them?
Yeah, I mean, I think they finished second in points allowed in that year that Staley was with the Rams. And like you said, it's been a disappointment since he came to over to the Chargers. And what happened in the first year is I don't think that they had the personnel that he wanted, as particularly on the interior defensive line, to be able to two gap and stop the run. And then last year they bring in all the personnel, but they had a bunch of injuries. So again, this is one of the more talented defenses in the NFL, with what I would consider an average to above average defensive play caller. So they have a chance to be a top 5 defense. But we'll have to kind of see if everyone can remain healthy. I don't think we're going to start them as a top 5 in our priors, but I certainly would not be surprised to see them there at the end of the year.
What are your thoughts on the addition of Eric Kendricks?
Yeah, so they, like we talked about Drew Tranquill in the Chiefs segment. He's out, and they bring in Eric Kendricks, and I think that was a pretty good addition by the Chargers. So they basically bought the coverage dip, which I think is typically a good thing for NFL front offices to do, because coverage isn't as sticky year to year. But Eric Kendricks throughout his career has been one of the best cover linebackers in the NFL, and he had a poor season last year in Minnesota. But in 2021, he was the seventh graded coverage linebacker by PFF. So I think Kendricks is an upgrade over Tranquil. And like I said, this is definitely one of the more talented defenses in the league when you look at it on paper. I mean, Grant has pulled up the depth chart just now. And I mean, when you've got Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa rushing on opposite edges, and you've got a secondary of Derwin James and Asante Samuel, this defense certainly has a ton of potential.
Yeah, it kind of feels like if they stay healthy, we're going to see a pretty good year from them, because it looks like the offense is probably going to be better.
Yep, and this is really a last chance year for Staley. I think if they were to miss the playoffs this year in a very tough AFC, he's going to get fired. So it's time for the Chargers to finally make a run if it's in them.
I kind of think they're going to make a run. But let's move on to the Denver Broncos. So the Broncos win total is set at 8.5, and they're coming off a disastrous 2022 season where they finished 5-12 and were 26 in weighted DVOA. The team added Russ and Hackett before the year, but they did not live up to expectations. The team fired Hackett after going 4-11, but some blame is due on 22 players being put on IR. So how much can we really take away from the Broncos' disaster in 2022?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. I think again, let's level set ourselves. Let's look at where this team was going into last year. So going into last year, the market had the Broncos 2.6 points better than average. And looking at this roster, I think that roster is about the same this summer in terms of talent. But the coaching staff is clearly better. I mean, you're bringing in one of the best coaches of the past couple of decades. And last summer at this time, remember, Nathaniel Hackett was pretty much an unknown. He had never been an NFL head coach before, and he wasn't even calling the plays in Green Bay before he got hired. So just to touch on the roster point that I was making, they brought in Mike McGlinchey to play right tackle this summer. I think Frank Clark is a downgrade from Bradley Chubb, who they had on the team last summer, but they traded him during the season. And other notable losses this offseason were interior defender Draymond Jones and guard Graham Glasgow. But they were pretty much replaced by similar players by our ratings in Zach Allen on the interior defense, and then Ben Powers at guard.
What do you think we can expect from their new defensive coordinator, Vance Joseph?
Yeah, so I mean, Vance Joseph comes over from Arizona, and actually Zach Allen, who I just talked about, is following him from Arizona and had a relatively productive year with him. But Vance Joseph runs a relatively unique scheme in the NFL, with all the modern coordinators kind of shifting to either that Belichick, Brian Flores man blitzing style, or that Fangio, Staley, too high style. Vance Joseph does not run either of those. He runs kind of a unique fire zone heavy look. The Cardinals were fourth in blitz rate in 2022 and fourth in zone rate. And so, I mean, this Broncos defense to me has, average to slightly above average talent. I would say Joseph is a slightly below average defensive coordinator. So I could see this unit being average, and really the season is going to come down to whether or not we could the offense can live up to their expectations that we saw they had going into last year, changing the coaching staff.
Yeah, I think they should probably see an upgrade here, because you're going from Hackett to Sean Payton. How do you feel about that? How much can we really put in that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the market's kind of splitting the difference, and I don't have a huge take. I think we're just going to kind of monitor, what we see from them in the opening weeks. But like I said, they were 2.6 points better than average in market going into last year, and then at the end of last year, the market had them as 3 points worse than average, and they're going to start this year about a half point better than average. So they're kind of just splitting the difference, saying that Sean Payton is clearly a massive upgrade over Nathaniel Hackett, and Russell Wilson probably, just looking at his career stats, isn't as bad as he showed last year. I mean, there's a chance he fell off a cliff and will never regain it, but he's probably better than he showed last year. So right now we're splitting the difference, and I don't think we're going to have a massive take on the Broncos going into the 2023 season.
I saw an interesting stat the other day by Cleve TA, and The Broncos went under their win total last year by 5 games. 27 other teams since 2000 have gone under by 5 or more, and all 27 teams increased their wins the next year by an average of 4 wins, and 56% of them went over their over under win total. So I think 8.5 wins. I think the market's reflecting that.
Yeah, the market expects them to bounce back. That's a great stat from Cleve TA. Give him a follow if you haven't already on Twitter. But yeah, I mean, the market's reflecting that that they expect to bounce back, and pretty much everyone's just throwing their hands up and saying we're going to start this team around average, and we'll see where they go in the first month or so of the season.
Yeah, they're going to be fun to watch here. So let's move on to the Las Vegas Raiders. So the
Mm-hmm.
Raiders win total is set at 7.5, and they're coming off a 6-11 season where they finished 24th in weighted DVOA. The team had brought in Devontae Adams to play with Carr, but Josh McDaniels has since run him out of town, and many fans are not happy with bringing in Jimmy G. But could he be an upgrade to Carr?
Yeah, I mean, well, Carr was not good last year. I think that's worth noting. That Jimmy, I would say in a vacuum, Jimmy Garoppolo is a worse quarterback than Derek Carr, but Carr was only a 67 PFF grade last year, and we can pretty much expect throughout Jimmy's career, he's been a 71 PFF grade. And Josh McDaniels, who I think is a little bit underrated now, just based off of how it went for the Raiders last year in one-score games and how it ended with his head coaching career in Denver. I think people forget that Josh McDaniels has been a great play caller for a long time. He's shown a huge sample size of being a solid play caller in the NFL. And last year, he ranked 8th in our play calling metrics. And the Raiders finished 13th in scoring last year, despite Derek Carr having such a poor year. So if Jimmy Garoppolo can give Josh McDaniels just his career average performance, the Raiders certainly have a chance to finish above average in scoring again.
They also lost one of their fan favorites in Waller. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so Waller, he moves on to the Giants this offseason. But, he battled injuries last year. He ended the season with only 43 targets after averaging 118 targets per season the previous 3 years. So like I said, they finished above average, 13th in scoring last year with a banged up Waller. And they bring in Jacoby Myers, who finished 19th in EPA per target. And so, as long as Myers stays healthy, I think he can certainly match, if not do better than Waller's production last year. And they also bring in Austin Hooper. They sign Hooper to play tight end, and they drafted Michael Mayer. So I think that they can get into 12 personnel with those two tight ends more often this season, which McDaniels likes to do. That's certainly been a strength of his play calling throughout his career, is getting into 12 personnel, running play action, and hitting those tight ends in the seams. So I think this roster is starting to shape up to more of what McDaniels wants to see from it. And I think the Raiders offense is probably a little bit underrated going into this year, so long as Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy, which we've seen question marks throughout the offseason. We'll just have to monitor that as the summer goes on.
Yeah, it looks like the offense is going to be pretty decent, but when you look at the other side of the ball, I don't know if I would say the same thing. The Raiders signed and re-signed 10 different players for this offseason. Are there any that you like, any additions that you hate?
Yeah, so defensively, the Raiders were already a pretty bad unit. And then by our metrics, they're losing their second best defender, who was linebacker Denzel Perriman. They didn't bring him back, and that's going to be a big loss. Vegas was 0-5 in the games that Denzel Perriman missed last season, surrendering 29.2 points per game in those five. And for reference, they were 6-6 in the games he started. So that's a big hole in the middle of the defense. Certainly, Chandler Jones has not lived up to the contract they gave him. So it's basically Max Crosby and a bunch of below average players again. And I could see this defense being one of the worst in the league.
So it sounds like the Raiders are going to be a pretty big over team, huh?
Yeah. I could certainly see us playing over their totals to start the season, because we think the offense is probably slightly underrated, and this defense really could be setting up to be a disaster.
Yeah. Well, That'll do it for our AFC West breakdown. Let's send it over to our interview with Bob, and we're going to break down some college football for 2023.
Sounds good. Okay, Grant had to catch a flight, but here he is, the legend himself, one of the best college football handicappers of all time, 55% over 24 years of being tracked. Bob, welcome to the podcast that bears your name.
Oh, good to be here, Tanner.
Bob and I have had plenty of conversations over the phones through the years, but this is the first time it's available for all of you here on YouTube.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like, I know I need to promote my business more, but you're the same way I am. I just like to do the work. I work over 100 hours a week, as do you during the season, and I just like to put my head down in a handicap, and I figure that will take care of everything. But it's, we have so much good information, as you say, like on the website. All these write-ups are so good, and there's so much good information. Not enough people aren't seeing that stuff. So here we are, trying to reach out a little bit more and try to get more people to come. And a lot of that stuff's just on the site for free. I mean, it's just such a good resource. Even if you're not paying for some subscription to our, premium service, it's still a good resource for people that want to, do their own betting or even fantasy football, especially the NFL write-ups. There's so much detail about matchup analysis. And so here we are trying to spread the word, I guess. So finally I've
exactly.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about your process for setting the team ratings going into the season. You've had so much success with win totals throughout the years, and I was wondering what you're doing these days as compared to when you started, especially with transfers becoming just so much. There being so much more transfers recently than there has been in the past.
Yeah, that's been a little bit of a mix, but just going back to where it started, I started keeping track of returning production percentages of every stat that I could think of. It was percentage of offensive line starts, percentage of running yards, percentage of receiving yards returning, passing yards, the quarterback's class. Is he a freshman, starting quarterback, freshman, redshirt freshman, sophomore, etc. Passes broken up, tackles for loss, anything you can think of. I kept track of.
And you were doing that all the way back when you started?
Back in 2004 is when I started logging all that stuff. So in conjunction with that, I also have component ratings on each facet of a football team: offensive run, offensive pass, defensive run, defensive pass, special teams ratings, which do factor in more so in college football than in the NFL. So what I was able to do, after you get enough data, you can start to make projection on how much a team is likely to get better or worse in each of component rating based on returning starter production plus talent rating. Like it used to, the talent rating used to be just recruiting ratings, and it was weighted based on this year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and a certain weighting, and how that compared to the previous year. So you have a talent increase, talent decrease, returning starter production, and all that would go into algorithms to predict the next season's component ratings: rushing, passing, defense, etc. And that turned out, and the more data I get, the better that gets. And you learn interesting things along the way, which we can get into in a little bit. But with the part that's been tricky in recent years was the transfers and the transfer portal. It used to be where I'd have my recruiting ratings, and that does not include transfers necessarily, but any significant transfer, I would sort of manually adjust based on my experience, and that has worked out incredibly well. In fact, the last 2 years, my season win totals are good in general. They're 50, 21, and 1 since I've been releasing them, which is great. The last 2 years with all this transfer
and good
stuff,
recently,
19 and 3 the last 2 years. So
so clearly you're handling the transfers well. Whatever you're doing,
it's just gotten so overwhelming. So what I've had to do is do more of a talent rating instead of just recruiting ratings. I've had to add in doing something called a talent rating, which is it's a combination of recruiting ratings and actual performance at the previous school the player was at. So sometimes the player would just be better than the recruiting rating, and I'll have to make that adjustment, and then you get talent ratings. So it's been a sort of part art and part math. I think as most good handicappers are, those that are purely math, I think, have problems. Those that are purely art and subjective certainly have problems. I think I've become very good over the years, having done this for so long, of being good mathematically, but also being really good in the art form of handicapping. And I think you're along the same lines of the sports.
Well, and that's the thing you're talking about, transfer and looking at, the production of those players from where they're coming from. But sometimes it's not even players. And I know this from doing the same kind of priors work in college basketball. Sometimes they don't have great production, but they're down transferring. I specifically remember we bet UTSA in week 1 last year because you identified that they had some Power 5 down transfers on defense, and they had brought in Traylon Smith at running back, who was also a down transfer, and they ended up taking Houston to overtime in that game.
That one. I mean, I had Houston season win total under. And I remember there was no way I was going to, it's like, and Houston ended up squeaking out that game. I think they were down by 10 or 14 points in the fourth quarter. I was like, gosh, that was one I was counting on. TSA covered the spread, so I was glad about that. But I would have been a double winner had Houston lost that game in which they were favored. But anyway, Houston ended up having a down season. I ended up winning that win total. But nonetheless, it's things like that where talent's coming from Power 5 conferences and going to those other the smaller conferences like UTSA in this Conference USA in that case, and that can really make an impact when you get something like that. I've just been good at handling that in recent years, and I'm trying to. I don't have as many years of a talent rating as I do of recruiting ratings, so each year I'm learning a little bit more about how to handle that. And so far, I don't know if it's been more lucky than good. I think I've actually, just because I've done this for so long, I have an understanding of how to handle transfers. It's just becoming so overwhelming that now I have something in place that I'm doing each year. And as I get more data, I think it'll be,
you can quantify.
Be able to fine-tune that even more.
Yep. Yeah. So what is let's go ahead and transition from talking about priors to what is your handicapping process during the season once we start getting actual data from the teams playing on the field?
Yeah, a lot of early season. I don't dive in, a lot with a lot of plays early in the season. I know some people do. My priors have been good, and they tend to do well early in the season. I just like to see a team play as well, and I'll have more bets week 1 probably than I will week 2 sometimes. I mean, I don't want to overact to 1 week, but a lot of times I'll have something in my head that this team I think is going to improve. Maybe it's a new coach or a new offensive coordinator or something. And I have an idea in my head about how this team, where the range of this team could be. And if they sort of fit that description week 1, if they, are playing the way I think they're capable of playing based on what I thought was possible, then maybe I'll bump them up more than just one game should bump up their prior. Obviously, I'm just adjusting my prior based on the week 1 performance, and then I get week 2, and you start adding in and a little more weight with each week toward what's happened so far in the season, and a little bit less weight each week with the prior. But a lot of times I'll abandon the prior earlier with some teams, especially if it's coaching changes, new quarterback. I remember when Coastal Carolina brought in Grayson McCall. And after, I think the first game he beat Kansas. Sorry about that. It was at Kansas. And I thought, wow, this kid, I watched that game actually. And I'm like, this kid looks really good. And he didn't have a particularly great recruiting rating, but he was just in control of that offense and really accurate passing. And after 2 or 3 weeks of this, I was like, Coastal Carolina is good. I mean, they're legit. And I sort of tossed out my prior. And we've done this in the NFL with certain teams over the years since you've been with me.
Yes,
in the
we
NFL.
have.
So it's like I said, it's a bit art form, a bit math. There is a certain percentage of in-season data to prior weighting as the season goes on. And I tend to dump the prior earlier than most handicappers do. I know most handicappers in college will have their prior going on longer. I tend to dump it after about 4 or 5 weeks and just go with the in-season.
Because you feel good about what the data is coming in.
Yeah. I mean, as who was coach? You are what you are, Dennis Green, maybe, or one of those coaches like, you are what you are. Yeah, you are what you are, and I sort of believe that in college football more than the NFL. I mean, so some teams will drastically be different from one season to the next, or drastically outperform or underperform expectations. And I'm not so stubborn with my initial evaluation of a team that I'll just overlook something, team playing, really, really well. And I'm talking about underlying metrics, not a team's winning, 40-20 as a 3-point dog because they were +4 in turnovers. I mean, obviously there's a lot of luck in that, but I'm talking about, how they're controlling the line of scrimmage and, and success rates and stuff like that. If I see a team playing much better or much worse, if I have a reason for it, if it's a new coordinator on defense, for instance, and you go from being bad defensively to being consistently good in your first 3 or 4 games, I see that pattern. I'm like, I'll toss out the defensive prior and that team and say, okay, there's a legitimate reason for this team to be better than expected. Or, it could be the flip side where, somebody leaves and all of a sudden you've seen it where the offense falls apart because a really sharp offensive coordinator has left the program, and then all of a sudden they'll be much worse, and I'll if I have a good reason to suspect if there's a reason for the difference, I'll abandon my prior even sooner. But normally by week 5 or 6, I've tossed out most of the priors and just gone with my in-season math model.
And so are you also factoring in, you basically have the math model, but you're also factoring in weather and potential matchup things like Navy, only running the football, so it doesn't matter how good the other team's pass defense is, things like that.
Weather is a component, and we know how much weather affects running and passing. And I forget who they played. It might have been Louisiana Lafayette or Arkansas State, one of those really good Sun Belt teams a few years ago. It was Georgia Southern when Georgia Southern was running the option. Georgia Southern had 2 things going for them that year. They had a pretty good option offense, not great, but pretty good. And option offenses are never great. They're just pretty good. And they had a really strong defensive line, and they could stop the run. They had a terrible pass defense. I remember they had a 20, 22-point underdog against someone on like a Thursday night, Sun Belt game, or Wednesday night. It was one of those weird games. And I remember, and it was like 30-mile-an-hour winds and rain. And I was like, I forget who they were playing. I was like, they're not, I think it might have been Arkansas State with Bryce at quarterback. And they had a pretty good passing offense. I was like, they're not going to be able to throw the ball in this, and they're not going to be able to run on Georgia Southern because that is what Georgia Southern does, is they stop the run. They had a really good defensive line, and they're going to be able to run their offense. And I thought, getting 21 points. So my model, I think, had just, if there was no weather involved at all, I think it had like Arkansas State or whoever it was by 18 or 18 and a half. The spread, like I said, was 21 or 22. And I thought, so there's some value there. When I did the weather component, it dropped. It was like 3.5 points value due to weather. So even if I had no value at all, just based on the math, just the weather alone in that particular game, because of the run-heavy nature of one team and the pass-heavy nature of the favorite, was like worth 3.5 points just due to weather. And right there's a 60+% bet. And Georgia Southern won straight up. I mean, so it does, that kind of stuff.
They won straight up? Wow, that's crazy. They won straight up.
Those don't come along very often, where it's like the weather plays that much of a role. But, I do look at it, I do adjust my math model components based on projected weather. But normally it's not that extreme, but it's great when it works out like that,
So the last thing I wanted to talk about was just home field advantage, how that's changed throughout the years, particularly since the couple of seasons we've had after COVID, and maybe what home field advantage number you think you're going to go with going into the 2023 season here.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time on this. I've tried to do like a little bit, kind of like a 5-year, not a rolling average, because there's been a little bit of a downtrend, but I think around 2013 or so, the home field advantage was still closer to 3 points. I mean, when I started the model back in this particular model, the original model back in 2004, I think home field was 3.4 points, something like 3.6, 3 point, somewhere around there for college football. And it's declined over the years. And 2013 was the last year where it was around over 3 points. I think it was 3.4, 3.3 that particular season. And then it started to be 2.8, 2.8, 2.6, 2.7, 2.5, and it starts just drifting down and down and down. Obviously, with COVID, I quickly, calculated what the home advantage was. And I think that particular year, it was something like a half a point or a point. It was not much at all in college football. In the NFL, I think it was maybe half a point or maybe nothing.
Yeah, I think if I remember right, in the NFL, it was basically zero throughout all
Yeah.
of COVID, which
And
surprised me
college,
because there
college
should be
always
some
has a little
travel.
bit more because I think the travel affects the college students a little bit more than professionals. So I think that
Yeah, I
that
think so.
is probably why there was a little bit more. And then in 2021 was sort of a hybrid season. Like some stadiums had fans and some didn't, and and then it was 2.0 that particular year. That was 21. So in 22, I thought, all right, I'll go back to. I think I decided because right before COVID, it was around 2.6 or around 2.7, 2.8. So I'll go back to 2.7, which is a little bit lower than the average of the previous 5 non-COVID years. And last year it was around 2 again, which really
Wow.
surprised me. Although, I mean, that's sort of an average in a way, because the median was higher, and there was more like toward 2.5, 2.4, 2.3, something like that. So I think I'm going to go around 2.2 this year to enter the season as far as a standard home field advantage in college. I think I'm going to start with 2.2, which is trending a little bit down from what the median home field advantage was last year. But I mean, my model will adjust as the season goes on, so we'll see how it works out.
Right.
But, and as you know, in the NFL, it's just declining, and conference games are different than non-conference games, and just like division, non-division in the NFL. But it is something each year that like what's it going to be, and the 2 years of COVID's really kind of screwed up,
Yeah.
the methodology for trying to figure out what it is. But in general, road teams have tended to cover the spread more in college football than home teams do for years now. Almost every single year,
Yeah.
the road team covers a little bit more. And I think in the last 10 years, I think it's road teams 51.5% against the spread, just blind. So that's why I tend to shade it a little bit more toward the road team. But we'll see.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see where the market comes out too.
Yeah, I think I could probably figure that out pretty quickly after a week or two. But
yep.
I guess I could figure it out now based on you could do market priors, and then and then just figure out backwards fit it to figure out what the home what the prior what the market's using as a home field advantage. But I'll stick with my 2.2 for now and see how that goes.
All right. Well, you heard it here first, folks. 2.2 points for a home field advantage in college football this season.
We'll see.
Thanks, Bob, for coming on. Episode 1 of the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast.
Make sure to check the website for insight on the free analysis that we post during the NFL and college football season. And please don't forget to like and subscribe.
Grant, you sound like a YouTuber already.